Hello everyone and welcome to your video for your second to last video assignment for RL Skills 4. As you can see by your screen, we are going to be taking a look at Evocation, a serial piece for solo piano by Hale Smith. So go ahead and grab your score. And I actually already went through and marked up some of the major annotations for you just to make sure that they would be nice and neat. Now, this is a serial piece, but we will actually not be dealing with pitch with it for this class. We are going to deal exclusively with rhythm. So your video 5 assignment has multiple parts, and one of them will be to perform excerpts of this piece rhythmically only. And then we will have a second part that involves you putting together your own tone row. And we'll discuss Hale Smith's tone row and some ideas for developing your own, but that will be in a few minutes. Let's take a look at the score as we have it here. Now you can see I've highlighted the first 7 measures. Now, what we are going to do with this first excerpt is you are going to be responsible for conducting and speaking the composite rhythm. And that's why I have both staves highlighted. Now, when I say composite rhythm, I mean that you are going to be performing vocally, so tying the rhythm of both hands. Now, to do that, first let's take a look at a couple of important aspects of the piece itself. First off, you begin in a 5/4 time signature. We've done a lot of conducting in 5 this semester, so you get a little bit more of that. We also do change time several times in this excerpt. So we move to 2/4, back to 5, and then we finish up in common time for the last measure. So that's the first thing to notice. The second thing that you may have already noticed is we do also, on top of being in 5/4, we also have a couple instances of quintuplets. They are actually different quintuplets though, and I want to make note of that now before we even get into the rhythm. These first 2 instances of quintuplets are triple beamed. So they are 32nd note quintuplets, which means they fit into half of a beat. Now contrast that with measure 4, we have an incomplete 16th note quintuplet. And this is what most of us have been doing in class, quintuplets fitting into a single beat. So we will be playing around with those 2 variations of quintuple subdivisions. We also have some triplets in here and some small subdivisions, 16th note triplets, and dealing with some 16th note subdivisions as well. So how do we go about tackling this? First off, for your videos, you will be asked to perform with a metronome. And part of the reason for that is this is quite a slow piece. So the notated tempo is quarter note at 56. So we're going to shoot for a range here. So we'll say 50 to 56 would be kind of a goal range for this. But you will put a metronome on before you start your video and perform all these rhythms with the metronome going. Now, let's take a look at this. Performing composite rhythms is really fun, but it does take a little bit of legwork in terms of figuring out where your beats are and where everything lines up, since they're not in one line together. But one thing I like to do is to actually write the beat numbers above or in between or below my score, especially something as busy as this, so that I know exactly where my 5 or 2 or 3 or 4 beats are. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So we start off with our downbeat, where we are actually just silent and clicking a beat with our conducting. So beat 1 occurs and we are doing nothing. Our quintuplet occurs on the and of beat 1. Beat 2, we are just hanging out. Beat 3, I'm going to jump in between the staves. We are also resting, and that next quintuplet comes on the and of beat 3. We're tied over for 4, and we tie into the triplets at 5. Now I'm going to continue kind of filling in here. So you're resting on 1, you have an attack at 2, and now we're going to jump down to the left hand for the rest of this system. So here's beat 2, where we have this attack here. We can see that we have beat 3 here, and we have this 16th note that happens right at the tail end of beat 3. So our third beat is here. That 16th note happens on the if you're a one-and-a person for your 16th notes. And then we have 4 and 5, and the next downbeat subsumed by that last note. And then beat 2, of course, is here. Now, I would encourage you to do this for the next 4 measures on your own and come back and see if you have the same thing as me. I'm going to go ahead and do it. I'm going to speed the recording up so you don't have to watch me write. But you can compare notes or just see what I have at the end if this is helpful for you. And then we're actually going to take this for a rhythm run. Okay, there might be a clearer way to write this, but this is what I've got for you. So I have all of the subdivisions kind of marked out. And before we go through this, I want to talk about how to best navigate this as you're practicing in terms of the constantly changing subdivisions. So I'm going to change colors here, and I'm actually going to give you some annotations that just refer to kind of what you might want to be thinking while you're hanging out on those longer notes in terms of what subdivisions. So obviously, when you are preparing, when you're giving a measure of preparation before you start, you're going to be thinking in quintuplets, but 30-second note quintuplets. So you're really feeling the 8th note and internally subdividing that into 5s. That way, when I get to the end of beat 1, I know what it's going to sound like, and I can just jump right into it. And that sets you up really nicely for the end of beat 3. Now, as you're hanging out on beat 4, because you have this tied over note into beat 4, into a quarter note, here is where I'm going to start thinking in triplets. So as you're hanging out on beat 4, you've got to reorient inside of your brain and put an internal triplet in there so that you can nail this rhythm here. When you get to the next measure, you're kind of home free for the first couple of beats, right? When you get to beat 3 though, so right here, I would definitely, if you haven't already, start subdividing in regular 16th notes. So you are thinking 3E end, and you can come right in on the of that beat. Okay, that's a lot of talking. Let's try it. We're just going to do the first line. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to subdivide out loud pretty much the entire time. So I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of a stream of consciousness of how you might practice this out loud, subdividing out loud to give yourself some help. So my beat's going to be about here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 1. Taka taka ta 2, 3, taka taka ta 4, 5, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 1, 2. So that kind of gives you an idea of how these rhythms fit within each measure. And you could continue to do that for measures 4 through 7, counting the beats and speaking the subdivisions. Now, I still want you thinking with those subdivisions when you have the chance. So while you're sitting here, this is probably the hardest part of this excerpt, is changing over from the 30-second note fives to the 16th note fives. So while you're sitting here having this nice long held out note and your bar of 2/4, I really need you in your head starting to subdivide those quintuplets. So if I were to go, let's say from this measure, I'm just going to conduct and kind of click at you. 1, ta, 3, and ta ta, 5, da 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 da. So I'm ready to go by the time I get to the downbeat of 4, because as I'm sitting here, I am really thinking about those quintuplets and starting to feel them early. Now you are missing the first quintuplet. If that throws you off while you're practicing, put it in. Just stick it in there. Do a full quintuplet on beat 1 of measure 4 as you're learning the excerpt. And then once you're comfortable with the rhythm, then start taking the downbeat out. But if having it not there initially is really messing with you, put it in. Put a little like place, I call them placeholders. Put a little placeholder in there if you're struggling. And then you can always take it out once you get more comfortable with the rhythms. Okay, so that is your first excerpt. Let's scroll down. You've got a little one at the top of the next page. And now we're no longer doing composite rhythms. I just want the right hand. And this one is, I think, a bit easier. You're navigating a bunch of different subdivisions, but it's not nearly as busy. So I'm going to go ahead and put the beats in again. All right, so I think that one is a little bit more manageable. Your last excerpt starts at the bottom of the page, and this is in the form of the actual piece. This is where the A prime begins. So we are going to have some similarities in this passage as to the very opening passage you did. One thing that's super important, look at measure 34 for me for a second. I'm even going to zoom it in. So measure 34, we have these triplets that are in the midst of some ties. So they're challenging all by themselves. This 3 here, this is not a triplet 3. That is a fingering indication. So please don't get confused by that. You can even kind of just cross it out if it's going to confuse you, but it is an indication for the player's fingerings. It has nothing to do with the rhythm itself. So with that in mind, then again, we are just doing a kind of composite of the right hand rhythm. The ties in all of these passages, so ties here, and especially the ties here, can be really challenging. I say this all the time. If a tie is messing you up, take it out. Practice without tie, and then go back and put it in. So can we take a look at 34 and do it without the ties? So I'm going to pretend that none of the ties are there, and I'm going to articulate every single note. So I'm going to take the tempo about here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ta, 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 ta. Now, once you can do that, and again, I'm subdividing triples in my head like crazy for that. Even on beat 1, when I'm sitting on that quarter note, I'm thinking in triplets. Once you can do that, then you put the ties in. So let's try that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ta, 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 ta. So for your video then, you will perform with a metronome, conducting and speaking the rhythms as we have laid out. I am going to, as a courtesy, let's go through the whole thing. So we're going to go through each excerpt one time at quarter note is 50. You can't see me conducting because I didn't turn the video on because I didn't feel like putting makeup on today. So I'm going to just trust you with the conducting, but this will at least give you a sense of what it will sound like. So let's give it a go. We'll go through each excerpt once. So here's 50. Here's your quarter note. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. 1. Taka taka ta. Taka taka ta. Ta ta. Ta. Ta ta. Ta 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 ta. Ta 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 ta. Okay, so that's excerpt 1. Things to think about. There are dynamics marked in here, which I did not do, and we would love to hear them from you. So we start out forte, you get this nice drop to mezzo piano here, up to mezzo forte, and then forte, mezzo forte. So kind of terrace E dynamics, not a lot of nuance, but we would like to hear them nonetheless. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, and ta 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 ta. And last but not least, let's work through this last A prime-ish excerpt. One, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. Taka taka ta ta. Ta 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 ta. Taka taka ta 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 taka taka ta ta ta. And there you have it. So for that first video assignment, you are very welcome to send us one video of you doing all 3 excerpts. If you're just kind of knocking them out one after the other, you're very welcome to just send us one video with all 3 of them and you just taking a second in between to scroll down or what have you. Now, the other thing we're going to talk about, I mentioned that this is a serial piece. And it starts out with its prime row, which I'm going to show you here. Now, you guys sang a row for your video assignment 4. And thinking about that row for Miles mode, it was really kind of stuffed full of seconds and thirds. A lot of thirds, seconds, thirds and seconds kind of through the entire row. And it gave it a very particular kind of sound. Now, looking at the row that we have here with evocation, it actually contains this really important trichord in it 3 different times. So I'm going to kind of stem a couple of notes here. So the row starts off with this half step, and I'm not playing this as it's presented. I'm just choosing an octave in presentation. So we get this half step, and then we get this chain of perfect fourths. Now, if I were to kind of invert these intervals, we could also say that this is instead a chain of perfect fifths. Now, this, of course, is then derived from the circle of fifths. The label for this trichord, it's an 027. I'm not sure how many of our classes have gotten to that. I don't think mine has yet. But it's a collection, a trichord that is derived from the circle of fifths. If you take the circle of fifths and just clip out any 3 consecutive pitches, that will give you an 027 trichord. And Hale Smith doesn't just use one 027 in this row. He uses 3. So here's another one. And this one's notated a little bit differently because I was trying to just avoid ledger lines for my theory handout. But that one is also an 027. So we have 9 of the 12 notes in this row participating in this very specific sound. So if I play this row for you, there's your first 027. There's your second one, and there's your third one. And if you were to actually look through the piece, you see that Smith actually does exploit those 027s in a very particular way. He tends to play them as descending perfect fourths and really kind of highlights them in that way. Now, the reason I'm telling you this and kind of comparing this row to the row for miles mode is that the second part of your assignment, we are asking you to compose your own tone row. So your own 12-tone row. And we're going to ask you to do 2 things. One is there's going to be a Google Doc attached to your assignment. And we just kind of want to know what your thought process was in composing your row. Is there a specific interval class that you're trying to exploit? Is there a particular sound that you're going for? There are tons of ways to manipulate a row to get various sounds. So we've seen now 2 different rows that exploit different intervals. So you can explore that further with your own row. So that's the first thing we're going to ask. And the second thing we're going to ask is for you to improvise on your row. So you'll be singing or playing through your row at least 3 times for this improvisation. Now, when we say sing or play through this row, yes, you have to sing the pitches in order and all of that stuff, but that doesn't mean you can't repeat pitches. Look at what Hale Smith does, and he does this a lot with his row. Repeating a note is fine. So keep that in mind as you're playing around with this, and also look at all of this incredible rhythmic variation that we get here with this piece. You can create tons of variation in your improv simply by adding in cool rhythms. We're also going to be asking you to explore a couple of different parameters besides just pitch and rhythm. So throughout your 3 passes through your tone row during your improvisation, we're asking you to choose a particular musical parameter to explore. And your options for that are timbre, register, and dynamics. Now you can do more than one of these 3, but at least one. Now, obviously, if you're, say, on a piano, it's going to be a little tough to explore timbre without damaging the instrument, and please don't do that. So you might have to consider register or dynamics. And even just looking at the excerpt that we still have in front of us, Hale Smith starts out with P0 here, and he actually returns to P0 for another statement here. And look how he adjusts the register. So we start out kind of high, middle voices in the piano, and then he takes the same row, he inverts the contour. We kind of live around this F sharp both times. The F sharp kind of acts as our mirror, and we play above it for this statement, mostly above it. And this statement, we play mostly below it. So you can play with register in that way, kind of maybe in a similar way, finding a mirror or an axis and improvising around that axis. If you have an instrument that you're comfortable playing in kind of extreme registers, that's a fun place to explore. But timbre, register, and dynamics. Dynamics is a really easy one to have a lot of fun with. So those are your kind of parameters for that. So you'll submit to us then for this part of the assignment a video of your improvisation, a screenshot of your tone row. We just would like to see a notated tone row, either handwritten or notation software, whatever suits you, and the completed Google Doc, which really is a super easy prompt just asking you about the construction of your row and why you chose the particular pitches and intervals that you did in the particular order you did. All right, so that is your assignment for video 5. We look forward to seeing and reading all of your responses. It is due on Friday, April 2nd, 11:59 p.m. And have fun, and we'll see you guys soon.